Hey everybody, this is Mr. Nixon. Wanted to go over the lab images that we have for this week. So this week we were supposed to go into the endocrine images and knock all of those out. We got a chance to get started on them on Monday, but then again, if you were like me, your brain was probably overloaded with another hour to go in class. So I wanted to go back through those images. This video is designed to go alongside with the PowerPoint that I'm about to supply to you. You'll hear about this PowerPoint tomorrow night in class. But what you want to do is you want to get this PowerPoint. So if you don't have the PowerPoint accessible right now, like you don't have it up on your computer, you haven't printed it out, you're not looking at the PowerPoint right now, you need to stop the video, go get the PowerPoint, and then bring it back and then start the video and watch the video as you're going through, because I'm looking at the images of the PowerPoint and I'm going to go through each one and talk about them for their different things. So in that first image, it talks about the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. And we talked about this at length on Monday night. We talked about the pineal gland, the fact that it secretes a hormone called melatonin. And that melatonin, the amount of melatonin secreted and the amount of light, they have an inverse. Light and melatonin have like an inverse relationship. The more light there is, the less melatonin you secrete. The less light there is, the more melatonin you secrete. So there's that inverse relationship. So when it starts getting dark, you naturally start producing more melatonin. You start wanting to go to sleep. The hypothalamus, that's a structure we're going to talk about through the rest of the semester. If you're not familiar with the hypothalamus, definitely go back to the brain chapter, check that information out, read about the hypothalamus real quick, look at the 8 different things that the hypothalamus does, because you will get inundated with those 8 things as the semester goes along. One of those 8 things is now in this chapter, which deals with the fact that the hypothalamus actually secretes hormones itself, as well as offers its regulatory control for other endocrine organs. For example, the hypothalamus has direct control over the pituitary gland to a certain extent, as well as sending signals to the adrenal glands. So the hypothalamus is very integrated in the process of endocrine control. Then you have the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland as a whole produces 9 different hormones. I know when you look at the form that I gave you Monday night, where it kind of breaks down who makes what, you're not going to count 9. You're only going to count 8. And some of you were in the room when I was talking about the fact that the reason why you look at this and you only see 8 hormones is because for a long time we thought the pituitary gland made 9 hormones. And then we discovered that there was a third structure in between the 2 lobes that was responsible for making MSH, which is melanocyte stimulating hormone. So since we discovered that melanocyte stimulating hormone comes from a third structure within the pituitary gland, we took that dude out. And that's why when you count how many hormones are drawn to the posterior lobe and how many hormones we draw an arrow to the anterior lobe, you'll only count 8, not 9. If you go to the next slide, it's essentially the same thing that we saw before. It's just enlarged, an enlarged image of the hypothalamus, the pineal gland, and the pituitary gland. But then you go to the next image, and the next image, it shows you an artist's rendition of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Specifically, it hones in on some structures that really don't have anything to do with the endocrine system, as well as many structures that do. So you'll see the hypothalamus. There's the bottom of the hypothalamus there. You'll also see something called the optic chiasma. The optic chiasma has nothing to do with the endocrine system. It's just important to know that it's there because the optic nerves from your eyes articulate with the optic chiasma, which is why the nerves cross, and it's why what you see out of your right eye is processed in the left side of your brain, and what you see through your left eye is processed on the right side of your brain, because they cross at the optic chiasma. That has nothing to do with the endocrine system. It's just there. You have your infundibulum, which the word means stalk. You can look at it. It looks like a plum hanging from the stalk on a tree. The infundibulum, it allows hormones to pass from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, so that the hypothalamus can tell the pituitary gland what to do. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, so let me back up for a minute. The hypothalamus can talk to both parts of your pituitary gland. It can talk to the anterior part. It can talk to the posterior part. The hypothalamus does not speak to both of them the same way. So when the hypothalamus is talking to your anterior pituitary, it talks to it using hormones. So hormones are released from the hypothalamus into a bloodstream, into a blood pathway, and that blood pathway travels directly from the hypothalamus through the infundibulum into the anterior pituitary to give it direct access. However, when the hypothalamus is talking to the posterior pituitary, it speaks with it using action potentials. So it actually sends signals through neural fibers that are passing through the infundibulum to the posterior lobe. So the hypothalamus has two different ways it can speak to the pituitary gland. It all depends on which lobe it's talking to. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. So in the next image, you should see a picture of the hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, the thyroid gland itself. So essentially what that is that's a larynx. That's your voice box. I know it's probably not what you expected to be your voice box, but that is the voice box. And what you're seeing is a whole bunch of other structures that sit on top of your voice box. So like your hyoid bone has nothing to do with your endocrine system, but it is there. And it's a very important structure because your hyoid bone is what your tongue muscle sits on top of. When you swallow, the muscles actually use the hyoid bone as their stationary structure that allows them to be able to open your throat wider so that you can swallow and then retract and let the throat go back to its normal shape and consistency. The thyroid cartilage, that's the Adam's apple. It's very pronounced in males, not as pronounced in females. It's there to protect your voice box. You have the lobes of your thyroid gland. The fact that they have lobes, nothing different is happening in one or the other. They both do the exact same thing. You have a left and you have a right. You have the isthmus, which is a bridge. It actually means bridge, and it connects the two lobes together because the lobes don't connect in the back. If you turn this picture around, or you were able to turn this model around, you would find out that the thyroid gland does not attach at the back. It only attaches at the front with that bridge. And then just below the thyroid gland is the trachea, which is your windpipe, and it begins after the larynx, and it continues going down until it splits into bronchi, and then the right primary bronchus goes into your right lung. The left primary bronchus goes into your left lung. So at this point, you should see an image that shows a tissue sample of your thyroid gland. It's some weird purple cells with lots of orange Kool-Aid on the inside of them. The orange substance inside of these follicles is known as colloid. Colloid is an aqueous solution. You'll see the word colloid used from time to time, especially if you stick this thing out with health sciences. Colloid is not only found here. It's an aqueous protein solution that can be found in other areas of the body. Sometimes it's where you want it to be, and sometimes it's not where you want it to be. In this particular case, colloid is where you want it to be, inside these follicles, where we can store thyroid hormone in there. And the guy who is making thyroid hormone is going to be these purple cells that surround the follicle, known as follicular cells. They make thyroid hormone using amino acids and iodine. Believe it or not, here's a crazy thing. Um, if you took iodine out of someone's diet, they would make thyroid hormone, but the thyroid hormone would be incomplete. It wouldn't work. So if you took iodine out of their diet, the thyroid hormone wouldn't work. They start encountering all these strange disorders because of the lack of thyroid hormone. And it could actually ultimately lead up to them passing away. Way back in ancient times when Rome was running things, Roman philosophers, they went out to research and study other parts of Europe, and they went up into the mountains. And when they got really high up in the mountains, they found people living up there with all these deformities and disorders. And they said, oh man, so basically if you live too high above ground, you'll encounter these issues and you'll acquire these diseases and these disorders. So they came back down off of the mountain and they went out into the plains. And while they were out there in the plains, they met people with these same diseases and disorders. And they were like, okay, we're confused because we thought it was just if you live too high up. But now here are these people, they're practically sea level, if not below sea level, and they're dealing with problems. So what seems to be the issue? Well, the issue was that when you live that far up and when you live on plains that are devoid of a lot of essential nutrients, you don't have iodine. And what we did was we started naming people who developed the disorder due to iodine. We said that they were experiencing cretinism, and we would refer to them as someone who had cretinism. They lacked and devoid of iodine. They would have mental retardation and all types of other stuff because of that. Now, for those of you who are historians, you'll remember that way back in the day, cartoons, the villains used to refer to their henchmen as cretins. They used it as a derogatory term. You notice that cartoons don't use that terminology anymore because of how the context of where that word came from. It's talking about a person whose mind is mentally disordered and a host of other disorders and disabilities due to a lack of iodine. Not exactly the nice thing to call somebody. Going back to the picture, you've got a follicle, which that big circle that's going around that whole thing, that entire thing is a follicle. Remember, think egg. Okay? What we've done in this picture, we've taken an egg and we cut it in half. So we're looking into the egg. We cut the egg in half. So we're looking at the egg. That purple would be the edge of the shell all the way around. And we're looking inside at the yolk, which would be the orange colloid. However, outside of the follicles are these little raisinette looking things. And these little raisin looking things are actually parafollicular cells, also known as C cells. They call them parafollicular because para means in between. Follicular is referring to follicle. So parafollicular, in between follicles. That's what these cells are. They make calcitonin. Remember, calcitonin tones down calcium levels in the blood. That brings us to our next image, where this image actually shows the larynx or voice box from a posterior view. So the initial one that we were looking at showed it from an anterior view, where you could see the thyroid cartilage, where you could see the thyroid gland, you could see the hyoid bone. This image right here shows all of that from the back, from a posterior view. And they point out the fact that there are 4 parathyroid glands on the back of this model. Parathyroid glands, you can have more than 4, you can have less than 4. It doesn't matter how many you have. You still secrete the same amount of PTH as everybody else. PTH stands for parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone increases calcium levels in the blood. That's going to be your orange cells that are making PTH. Those orange cells are called chief cells or principal cells. But there's some brown cells in the picture. And the brown cells are Oxy Fuel Cells. They call them Oxy Fuel Cells because when they fill with oxygen, they turn brown. And we have no idea what they do. So that kind of brings us up to speed. That covers everything we talked about Monday. That brings us to these 2 slides. and that it produces a hormone that helps your T cells to mature. Your T cells, when they arrive at the thymus gland, when you first make them, they don't have a job. They don't have an MO. They don't have a select purpose. If you were invaded by pathogens, those T cells would not be able to do anything because they have not been given a specified function. But once those T cells get to the thymus gland releases a special hormone that stimulates the T cells to differentiate and therefore become the specific types of T cells that they're supposed to be to help defend your inner universe. That's why it's so important. The adrenal glands, they sit on top of your kidneys. Some people refer to them as suprarenal, supra referring to superior, which means above, renal referring to kidney. So above the kidney, suprarenal gland. So you can call it either one. As long as you're in here, you can call them adrenal glands, you can call them suprarenal glands. It doesn't matter. You get to choose. So we have another artist rendition again. This kind of shows us the adrenal gland and says, there's like three major areas of an adrenal gland. There's the outer capsule, there's the cortex, and then there's the medulla. Now, pause. Stop for a minute. Here's something you need to understand. A lot of your soft organs in your body, these are organs that don't have muscle. They don't have some kind of dense tissue in them to give them shape, to give them rigidity. They don't have muscle. They don't have bone. They don't have cartilage. They're soft organs. Oftentimes, soft organs are those organs that people like to eat, like in giblets and stuff like that. So adrenal glands, that's considered a soft organ. It has no muscle. It's got no cartilage. It's got no bone, nothing in there to keep it stable. So the thing that keeps its shape and conformity is the capsular layer, the capsule. That capsular layer gives it protection. It gives it shape. It makes it the adrenal gland that we all recognize in a picture. Same thing with your liver. Like most people can guess a liver when they see one. Why? Because most livers are the same shape. Why? Because the capsule layer, the capsular layer provides the ability for it to be able to have the shape that it has. The cortex and the medulla, you're going to see this over and over and over again this semester. I'm kind of amazed when people don't learn what the cortex is and what the medulla is. Not that they don't understand or it just takes them a long time to figure it out. I'm not talking about that. There's people who just ignore it constantly. And then finally, they just finally bow down and say, okay, I give, I quit, I give. I need to know what cortex and medulla are because they're going to ride this thing all the way to the last test of the class. Oops, did I say that? My bad. Yeah. So cortex and medulla. Cortex is always the outer region of a soft organ. Medulla is always the inner region of an organ. Cortex, outer region. Medulla, inner region. Think of a watermelon. The melon rind is the cortex. The pulp on the inside is the medulla. So when you get to this next picture, excuse me for a minute. So when you get to this next picture, it looks really crazy. It's probably something you've never seen before. The next picture that you should be seeing has a bunch of layers to it. And I have a bunch of green arrows and brackets, and it's all kind of crazy. Believe it or not, we put this picture in the book a certain way. In a way, this image it's not backwards per se. It's just showing you the bottom of the adrenal gland instead of the top. Because if we were looking at the top, everything would be in a different order. So let's start from the outside and work our way in. The number 5 is talking about the blue fibrous layer. That blue fibrous layer is going to be your capsule or your adrenal capsule. It doesn't make anything. It doesn't do anything. It's for protection and structure. That is its job. So on the test, I love putting like this trick question on the test. Hopefully I'll remember to put it on this one. Oftentimes I'll put a trick question on the test that says, what substance does this layer secrete? And the answer would be none. The adrenal capsule doesn't secrete anything. He's just there for protection. So that's a trick question. The answer is none. It produces nothing. Number 4 is the Zona Glomerulosa. And zona means zone. Glomer means little small balls. So Zona Glomerulosa, this is the zone of circular shaped cells. And when you look closely, you'll see that the cells have a circular shape. So when you look close enough, you'll see that the cells have a circular shape. That zone, circular shaped cells, Zona Glomerulosa. And it makes a group of hormones called mineralocorticoids. Now, mineral is talking about, they say mineral because they're talking about electrolytes. They're talking about the minerals that you and I ingest every day. So sodium, potassium, manganese, magnesium, zinc, iron, all that stuff. Those are minerals, but they're also electrolytes. They're the stuff that you have to get replenished in your body when you've had a really bad flu. Mineralocorticoids, so cortico is referring to cortex. So mineral, those are electrolytes. Cortico, talking about the cortex of. So the mineralocorticoids, oid is referring to steroids. So these are steroids that are created in the cortex that affect the levels of minerals in your blood. That's what it means. When you move further up, you go to zone number 2. That's there's zone number 2, which is actually number 3 on the picture. That's zona fasciculata. The zona fasciculata, zona meaning zone, fasciculata, fascicles. These, what you're seeing there, they look like corn on a cob. They're big bundles of cells, strapped together as a fascicle. So you've got fascicles of these cells in this zone, zona fasciculata. And the interesting thing about these cells in the zona fasciculata is they make a group of hormones known as glucocorticoids. And glucocorticoids, what they do is they focus on providing more readily available energy to the bloodstream when you need it. Now, most of you have heard of a very famous glucocorticoid called cortisol. Cortisol is not a bad thing per se, because you release cortisol when you're tired, when you're stressed. Like right now, I haven't had much sleep. I went to bed at like about 4:30 this morning, and then got back up. I don't know what time it was when I got this morning, like 7 or something like that. So I've been on the run. So I'm a little groggy. The cortisol in my system what was keeping me up all night and allowing me to finish some work that I really had to get done. I'd love to have some of that cortisol right now because I just ate lunch. So I got a different system kicking in. The itis is in. All right. So I would love to take a nap right now. But glucocorticoids, they kick in when you're under stress, when you work out, when you need to stay up late, when you need to work all-nighter, when you work your second, third shift. That's how that stuff works. Glucocorticoids, what they do is, they increase the amount of amino acids in the bloodstream by taking them from the muscles. They help to break down lipids that are stored in the adipose tissue, also that you can raise the amount of readily available energy in the blood, amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. Glucocorticoids are not bad, neither is cortisol, until you've been under its influence a little too long, because the side effect of cortisol and glucocorticoids is that it shuts off your immune system, which is why it always seems that you're a lot more susceptible to getting sick when you're really tired. That's why, because your immune system is probably in neutral. It's not going anywhere because these chemicals have shut them down, shut your immune system down. And so opportunistic invaders and pathogens, they seize the moment when they see that happen. And then last but not least of the zones is the zona reticularis. Reticularis referring to the reticular region. which a reticular region is always that last layer before you enter into a new layer. It's always that last layer before you enter into the deepest part of a structure. So zona reticularis, that area is responsible for making androgens. Androgens probably are not that important to some people at first, until you learn what you do with them. Men don't think about the androgens produced by their zona reticularis because once a male has gone through puberty, testosterone is produced by the interstitial cells in the testes, and this is going to continue for on and on and on forever and ever. Amen. But in a prepubescent boy, a child who has not gone through puberty yet, the testes are not producing enough testosterone for his body to be able to respond and develop. So what winds up happening is his zona reticularis of his anterior pituitary, not anterior pituitary, his zona reticularis of his adrenal glands then cranks out androgens, which are male hormones. Also, for women, ladies, you use these androgens as well because you use these androgens as a neurotransmitter in your brain, believe it or not. That leaves the last region, which is the adrenal medulla, which the adrenal medulla is all of that pink area. It's the inner core of the adrenal gland, and it's responsible for just making two things, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which when you combine epinephrine and norepinephrine, we say that you have gone into fight or flight. Another slide that you have here is a slide of a pancreas. It shows the different parts. I don't have to take all the time to point all those things out. Just they're real easy to memorize, and we'll see them again in the digestive system. You see the spleen over there with number 6, the purple thing. Spleen is not working with your endocrine system, but the spleen happens to be attached to the pancreas, which is a part of the endocrine system. Your spleen primarily, he deals with the lymphatic system. He deals with immunity. So the lymphatic system actually filters out dead and broken red blood cells out of circulation. It's chock full of white blood cells that jump on pathogens and rogue cells. So that's definitely not the endocrine system. To the far left on the page, you have the duodenum or the duodenum. It all depends on who taught you what. I know some people say duodenum, some people say duodenum. Potato, patata. Man, let's just go make some loaded baked potatoes. All right. So the pancreas itself is a double agent. Dude is in the digestive system and the endocrine system at the exact same time, and that is because when you look at the next photo, it shows all these weird purple things, and then it shows this big monster, this pink monster thing in the middle, and there's like this light blue writing that I have where I drew a big giant light blue outline around this islet of Langerhans. And that's because this is showing you a tissue sample of somebody's pancreas. So all those purple things all over the place, those things all they exist in the pancreas, but all those purple cells, what they do is they produce enzymes to help digest food. So those purple cells have nothing to do with the endocrine system. Those purple cells, those pancreatic acini, those big groups, and then each individual acini is made up of acinar cells. All of those purple cells, they make enzymes to help break down food. So they make enzymes, the enzymes leave the pancreas and they get dumped into the duodenum or the duodenum. Meanwhile, that big giant pink thing in the middle, that islet of Langerhans, or the pancreatic islet, that dude's job is to actually make insulin and glucagon. So when you get to the next photo, there are arrows that point out to the beta cells, and they say, hey, these guys make insulin. Then there are arrows that point to the alpha cells, and then it says, these guys, they make the beta cells make insulin, and the alpha cells make glucagon. People get these mixed up, and I totally understand it because it takes a minute to kind of understand. Insulin allows sugar to go into a cell. And if you're taking the sugar out of the blood and putting it into the cell, then that means that blood sugar levels are going to go down. So insulin, the presence of insulin makes blood sugar go down. Glucagon comes on the scene when glucose is gone. So when glucose levels in the blood are low, that's when these pancreatic cells release glucagon, because glucose is gone. So we need glucagon to come out and tap into other resources to add glucose back to the bloodstream. And that should be it. That should be the last slide in there. That hit us up at 30 minutes. This is what we were going to knock out on Wednesday night. So please go back through. Make sure you've got everything. If you have questions, don't be afraid to shoot me an email to ask me some questions. I'll be looking forward to them. You guys have a great day.